First, it's worthy of noting. Today, the 22nd of Shvat, of course, is the yahrzeit of Rebbe's wife, Chapei Shvat. Rebbe Chaim Mushka, so of course we dedicated the class to her. A story that, I'm not sure, you guys were at the Farbrengen on Shabbos? So you were? So I can share the story that my father shared at the Farbrengen yesterday, 2 days ago, sorry. Connection with my family and the Rebbetzin. My paternal grandmother's father, my father's mother's father, was related to Rebbe's mother. So because of the relation and because my grandmother knew them from Russia, whenever my grandmother would come from Australia, she would visit with the Rebbetzin in her house, which is a rare thing because 90% of Chassidim did not see the Rebbetzin, period. She was a very, very private person, by choice or by her own personality. Either way, she was an extremely private person, notoriously so, and she would avoid public. You would imagine someone, Rebbe's wife, could come to, and Rebbe found in the Sheikh Chabad, women's organizations, she could have been the guest speaker, to this, to that. She was an extremely private woman. But my grandmother, knowing her and being related and knowing her from Russia, whenever she would come from Australia to New York, she would be invited for tea, and they would chat, catch up on life or whatever. So my grandmother told the Rebbe's wife, the Rebbetzin, that the Rebbe looks tired. The Rebbe looks tired. She was living in Australia. She didn't necessarily see the Rebbe's intense activity like Chassidim here did. So she had the chutzpah, in a good sense, to ask the Rebbetzin, maybe that you should go on vacation. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin should go on vacation. She grew up in Chabad, obviously her father's Chabad, and the previous Chabad Rebbes all went on vacation. This is probably in the 80s, a story. Most Chassidim in the 80s, by the time the 80s came around, knew that the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, and vacation are two opposites. The Rebbe does not go on vacation. But previous Rebbe did go on vacation, and she asked to go on. She asked why didn't the Rebbe go on vacation? To rest up. So she said, it's a nice idea, but it's not practical because the Rebbe would need a mountain of Spartan. That was her response, kind of like jokingly thanking her for the offer, even though most knew that it was. That's a little story about the Rebbe's sensitivity. Whose yahrzeit is today? You went to Farbrengen, you heard the story? Yeah. All right. Menachot Tesam Aleph 29a, towards the bottom. We chose this section of the Gemara, of course, remember, because we wanted to get to the halachas of tefillin and mezuzah, and now we finally get to it. Before we get there, I want to just mention, we mentioned in the past here about the silver trumpets that Moshe Rabbeinu had to make. And we mentioned that they were not, he had to make them from his own material, and they had to be, and it was only used by him, not following generations. Other things that Moshe Rabbeinu made, the menorah, the other things in the temple, were used by future generations, but not the trumpets. We mentioned that. And I mentioned where I said that the trumpets were used in the temple to announce the order of the day. That was incorrect. I stumbled across the psukim that talk about it just recently, and I was reading something and it came to it, and they were actually used because Moshe Rabbeinu had the status of a king, a melech, and a king has trumpets to announce assemblies and to announce the going to war, to coming from war. That's the way a king makes his announcements. So Moshe Rabbeinu had these trumpets to make an announcement. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was a king like no other, therefore future generations could not use the trumpets that he did. So the trumpets were not for the temple use, as I said. They were actually for his use as a king, to announce traveling in the desert and to announce the whole system of how many blasts he was doing to make people gather for marching, for going, for traveling, or for coming to listen to a message from Hashem, or whatever the announcement was. Likewise, I can't remember exactly the details, but the Kahas Chumash has a write-up of what happened when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. About it. Actually, Hashem told him to do something with them, to bury them, to bury them or something.
That's right.
He was like, someone asked what happens when he passed away. He was actually instructed before he passed away to discard them in some fashion. I can't remember exactly. So that's about that.
The future kings never used those trumpets.
They made their own. It doesn't seem like Mashiach. It seems like Moshe Rabbeinu Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded to discard them before he passed away. That's what it is.
Mashiach is going to have the shofar.
There's trumpets as well with the shofar, actually. Shofar is accompanied with the trumpets, yeah.
In the temple, yeah.
Yeah. Except for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, most shofar blowing in Judaism was accompanied with trumpets at the temple and other things. Right. Okay. Now we get to the laws of tefillin, mezuzahs. Bottom of the page, there's 2 dots. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines from the bottom of the page. Middle of the line. The line starts with the word shenemar, and in the middle there's 2 dots, and it says shtei parshiyos, yeah? Shtei parshiyos sheb mezuzah. We're quoting now from the Mishnah, which said that the 2 chapters, the 2 sections of the Torah quoted in the mezuzah, we explained that the parshiyos don't mean parsha as we know it. When we say parsha, Torah portion, we mean the weekly reading. That's not what it means here. Parsha just means section. And chapters, the Gemara predates the use of chapters in the Torah. The splitting up of the verses, psukim, come from Moshe Rabbeinu, but the splitting up of the chapters actually come from the church, not from Judaism. It's been adopted because just for convenience sake of being able to identify what verse we're talking about, but it wasn't. The chapters are not created by Torah. The Torah's sections are called parshiyos sections, and as I explained, they go from those spaces that you see inside of the Torah. Whenever you get called to the Torah, you'll see these big spaces, either spaces that go they open and close middle line, or they open at the beginning of the line, or they open in the middle of the line and they go all the way to the end of the line. There are these big spaces in the Torah. Those are chapters. Those are sections. So when we say shtei parshas, when we mean 2 parshas, we don't mean 2 Torah portions that we read that would make for quite big mezuzahs, but 2 sections of the Torah that are each a couple of verses that describe, you shall place this on your door. If it has these words, you shall place it on your door, then we're doing exactly that. We're placing this chapter on your door. So the 2 parshas in the Torah, there are 2 sections in the Torah, which tell us to place these writings on your door. Sheb mezuzah, ma'ak v'zu ezu, they withhold each other. That is to say, if you have one and not the other, it's not as if you did one mitzvah but you're lacking a second mitzvah. It's one mitzvah comprised of 2 details, and therefore if you're missing one of the details, the whole mitzvah is invalid. Likewise, ksav echad, even one letter, one writing, ksav means a writing. One writing, ma'akvan, invalidates mezuzah. So if one letter is not the way it's supposed to, it's invalidated. This is what's one of the reasons what makes the mezuzah so expensive, because someone has to write them. And as we learn more and more of the laws, you'll appreciate more and more why mezuzahs are so expensive, and you'll appreciate more why mezuzahs need to be checked, and why it's worth spending the extra couple of dollars to get a really nice mezuzah. You'll see as we go along and how complicated the laws are. Both the person needs to be a scholar knowing all the laws, plus he has to be a semi-artist to be able to actually implement all these laws, as we shall learn. So the first thing the Gemara says is pshuta, obvious. Clear, obviously, if you're missing parts, the Torah says to have these 2 chapters in there. You don't have the 2 chapters, of course it's not kosher. The Torah says to write these words, and as Rashi says, the pasuk says uksaftem, and you shall write them. Uksaftem is divided into 2 words. Ksav, ksiva tama, kasav tam. You should be a wholesome or complete writing. So the Torah itself says, when telling you to write these mezuzahs, that they should be complete. So what's the Mishnah telling me? This big chiddush. Oh, even if you're missing a letter, it's going to be invalid. Of course, the Torah says to make a complete writing. Where's the law in the Mishnah that we didn't know before the Mishnah spoke? We know from the text of the Torah.
So definitely a printed one is out of the equation.
Oh, for printed one, definitely out of the equation.
A lot of people use printed ones because it's cheap.
I've found
it's the same thing.
I've gone to homes to check mezuzahs. We find things, printed scrolls that say. Someone recently showed me. Someone went to someone's house, changed mezuzah, took out the paper, piece of paper with the printed Yivarechacha, Berachas Kohanim, the priestly blessing. Someone told him, bought it in Israel. That's the common rebuttal. I bought it in Israel from a guy with a beard. Of course, it's kosher. You got to be very careful where you're buying it. Make sure you get checked. Even if you buy it from someone who's reputable, even if you do, human error is always a factor. So if you should get checked by somebody who didn't write it. You buy from one person, check by somebody else. What this person see that person doesn't see, and someone, even a God-fearing person who does mezuzah the way he's supposed to, and he missed a letter or he misspelled the word, and it's been missed when he reviewed it. But somebody else reviews it and they see it. So as we'll learn, we'll see
It makes it
more and more.
Right?
Sorry?
It makes it possible.
Certainly, it's valid.
Often it's the instructions of how to put it up
Inside.
Yeah.
Inside the mezuzah instructions how to put it up. Yeah. Okay. So Gemara says, Pete, that's obvious. The Torah says you have to make a complete writing. Obviously, if you're missing a letter, you're missing a parsha, of course it's invalid. So Amar Rav Huda Marav, Rav Huda said the name of Rav. Lo nitzrecha, this Mishnah is not needed, true, Ella only for the following case. L'koitze shal yud, for the spike, or the edge, the point of the yud. Now, which point of the yud are we talking about? So Rashi says, on the right side, Regel Yomani shal yud, the right leg of the yud, which basically is a yud. Its shape is like a small block, and then on the right hand side there's a little spike coming downward. That's what makes it a yud. So Rashi says if that little thing is missing, that's what it's referring to here. That's invalid. Even that smallest little thing. So the bulk of the letter is there, the body of the letter is there, but it's missing a little spike that goes downward. So it's a very minor detail of the yud. But others counter and say, here we're talking about.
That's what makes it a yud.
Exactly. So we're talking about this thing here, the one that comes down the bottom. So many of the commentaries tell Rashi, that's what makes it a yud. Otherwise, just a line. So that can't be the case. So there's two different other versions. If it means the yud, the little spike up there on the top, the crown coming up, or the crown coming down. So you can see how detailed we need to get when we're writing a letter, when we're writing a Sefer Torah. Already, when we're writing a mezuzah, tefillin, Sefer Torah, that a yud has to have all these little spikes. Now you think of mezuzahs.
That's a minhag, eh?
No. This is not a minhag. This is a law printed in the Gemara. It's not a custom. This is a law the Gemara is telling us. When the Mishnah says that if one letter is missing, it's invalid. What's the Mishnah talking about? The Mishnah is talking about the little spike on the yud.
I'm talking about the crowns.
Even the crown.
The crown says something else.
Not other crowns, but the crown of the yud.
Not other crowns.
The crown. We'll see which crowns are.
Not a crown.
It's actually part of the letter. It's a spike that's part of the letter. That's why I didn't call it yud. That's why I didn't call the word crown. It's kites. It's not tag.
Because tag is something else.
We're not talking about crown. This is a spike in the yud. And the point I'm making here is imagine these. You've seen mezuzahs that are this size, or tefillin that are this size, and how many letters have to be written in there, and how many lines be squeezed in there. Do you know how skilled you need to be to make these little spikes going up and down and not bump into the letter on top of you? It's very, very difficult to write mezuzahs, and the smaller your mezuzahs are, and the smaller your tefillin are, the more likely it is to be missing these things. And certainly if you're going to get to minhag of tagin, which are important as we'll learn, certainly becomes very questionable. So already right at the beginning, we're learning these little dots in the yud can invalidate your mezuzah. And unless you're a scholar which knows the difference between a tag and a kites, you can make a big error. So even the small little yud. So whichever one, there are three different versions as to what the spike here in the yud means, but either way, they're invalid. Says the Gemara, "V'hanami pshita." This is also obvious. It's part of the letter. Why shouldn't you need it? So there has to be something else. The Gemara is telling us when it says that if the Mishnah says if you're missing a letter, or if something's wrong with the letter, then it's invalid. It cannot be simply meaning the little spikes of the yud, because that's what makes it a yud. That's the part of the letter. If you're missing half the letter, you're missing the whole letter. So just because you're missing a small spike, therefore it's, I would think, less of that part of the letter. It's part of the letter. It needs to be valid. So what's the Mishnah teaching me when it says that if you're missing a letter, it's invalid? There's something unique the Mishnah must be teaching us. And if the Gemara continues, like the other law that Rabbi Huda said in the name of Rav. The Amar Rabbi Huda Amar Rav, for Rabbi Huda taught us the name of Rav, Kol Ois, any letter, She'ein Gvil Mukafla, that does not have parchment surrounding it. So the letter has to have parchment surrounding all around. That is to say, it's not touching any other letter. Right? Ma'ar Baruch Hasef, from all its four sides, Psula is, it's invalid. So even if you have the complete letter, but the letter touching some other letter, that's what the Mishnah means when it says that even one writing invalidates it. That even if two letters are touching, even though the letters are complete, it's invalid. Again, when you have tiny mezuzahs, this becomes a very big problem. Likewise, especially here in Montreal, where the weather changes, we get cold and hot and cold and hot. So your front door and your back, any of your outdoor mezuzahs should ideally not have plastic cases. And if they do, as it is in my house, you get them wrapped in a like a wax paper, not in like a not a saran wrap, which is clear, which might even magnify the sun, but actually like in some sort of protective paper. And the reason you're doing that is because heat, of course, makes things expand, and cold, of course, makes things contract, which is why we have so many potholes in the city, right? Because the streets are constantly expanding and contracting. So with the pothole making in the city, you also have crack making in your letters. And likewise, if the ink melts, especially in these tiny little, even if it melts the slightest amount, and it falls over and touches the next letter, it can become invalid. So here in Montreal, of course, the small mezuzahs are very difficult to maintain as kosher. Very rarely do I check a mezuzah in someone's house and the small ones and they come out kosher. It's rare. And the small tefillin and small mezuzahs. Even the big ones, because again of the weather here, they changed. Even if it was valid when you bought it, they should be checked again. Because if these things, letters are very close, small little ink spills or melts and it touches on the letter and it invalidates your mezuzah. So it's another thing to be worried about. Okay. More laws with respect to the writing of the mezuzah and tefillin. Amar Ashiyan bar Nidbach. This is a rare name. I don't ever remember reading a name like that. Do you know anything about this sage? Ashiyan bar Nidbach. His name. He said Mishmei de Rabbi Huda, in the name of Rabbi Huda. Nika teiche shel hay. If the inside of the hay was perforated. What does this mean? There's also again different versions, but we will go with Rashi's first version. Rashi gives us two versions. We'll give Rashi's first version, which means like this: the hay has two legs, right? Inside and exterior. Yeah. So when it says teicha, when it says the inside, is talking about this side, the inside of the hay, versus the outside leg. Yeah. Okay. So it says like this: Nikev teicha shel hay. If the inside of the hay is perforated, that is the leg that's on the inside, the small little half leg that's suspended in the air, right? It's not attached to the top, the bottom left of your hay. So if that one's perforated, kosher, it is kosher. Why is it kosher? Because essentially, because that part of the letter is not attached to the rest of the letter, so if it's perforated, so long as you can still identify it as a left leg, it's kosher. That hasn't ruined the totality of the letter hay. Right? If you have, like the yud, the small little stroke at the bottom right of the yud, if that's missing, it's not a yud anymore. It's just a splot of ink, right? But if you have a hay and the bottom and the left leg, the small one that's suspended, if half of it was chopped off, you still have the letter hay because you have the other half making it a leg. You follow what I'm saying? So it's missing some part of it, right? So okay, this hay right here. If I didn't have that spike going up, it still looks like a hay. Or if I didn't have the bottom of the half of it like that, it still looks like a hay. Because it's not connected to any other part of the letter, just by virtue of a little bit of ink being there, it's already identifiable as a hay. And therefore, if that letter is missing something, that part of the letter is missing something, it's still kosher.
So, same thing goes with an olive.
Oh, but olive, all parts are connected. So as soon as you have a hole,
Connected?
all parts of the olive are connected, yeah. Right, they're all touching.
So if it was below the line, it wouldn't be a valid hay. Like if it fell below the
That becomes a problem. So if I'm not,
whether it's part of the hay or something else.
or maybe it's a kuf. Maybe it's a kuf. If it goes too low, maybe it's a kuf.
Yeah.
So with that, we'll learn there's something called shilas tinuk, which means you ask a child who is, we're going to learn about this, you ask a child who can read but isn't that intelligent, meaning isn't so learned but is intelligent enough to read, ask them, what letter do you see? And that's how you know the unbiased opinion of what that letter is. A kuf, is it a hay or something like that? But that's a good point, yeah. But with a lot of these letters, we'll see with the spacings, if the words are too spaced out, and you don't know if it's one word or is it two words, again, you'll ask a child who can read with it. We'll see. Okay, so teicha shel yod, if the bottom left of the hay is perforated or missing, kosher, it's kosher, because again, it's still identifiable as a hay. Yerechai, the thigh of the hay, that is the right leg that's connected to the top, now it's cut off.
The outside leg?
The outside leg, well, the leg that's attached here.
Yeah, that's the outside.
So now it's cut off. Yeah, that's the right side, the one that's attached. Then, if it still has the minimal size of a small letter, like a yud, it's still kosher. Why is that? So, right here, you see how this letter here is missing the bottom half, but still identifiable as a hay. At least, or certainly if it's in context of other letters, where you see other letters the same size as the whole thing, then it would look like a hay.
Or half a dollar.
So then again, you'd have to ask a child with these questions. But the point he's making here is, so long as you can still identify. Sorry? Yeah, if it's Well, yeah, hey is a Dalet and Yud. A Dalet and upside down Yud on the left hand side. Yeah. But again, if you can still identify it as a hey, it remains kosher. But if it's been cut too high to the point that the top bar and this become separated, and so it looks like a bar on the top and just a randomly suspended blotch of link on the left, and it's no longer identified as one letter hey, then it's not kosher. But if you still have a little bit left here, so somewhat connecting the two pieces of the hay, you can say it's still a hay and remains kosher.
But you would verify with somebody else before you make that.
You would not make the call yourself, no. A professional scribe would make these calls, but these are the laws that they have to know in order to be able to be a professional scribe or professional magia or professional.
Something that's bothering me relating to scribes and that.
Yeah.
How do you know that they act with it? Do they have to pass some integrity exam? I mean, here's somebody.
So that's a good question. The truth is that unfortunately there's a lack of there's a little bit of lack of oversight in the industry.
That's what I'm talking about.
So there's no like a hechsher like you would buy on food, but there is something called ksav kabbalah. Ksav kabbalah is you have like it's a smicha for like a smicha is a rabbinical certificate. Ksav kabbalah is a scribe certificate. So you can and should ask when you buy tefillin mezuzahs, does the writer have ksav kabbalah? Does the writer have a certificate saying that he's a certified scribe? And it might cost you an extra couple dollars for that because you're getting someone who's professional. And
so who gave you that certificate then? Was there a group of?
There's in New York there's something called Vad Mishmer Stam. In Israel, there's also a board that oversees these ksav kabbahs.
Okay.
There's a lot of trust going involved in it, and nothing to do with it. Which is why I said before, when you buy from one person, you should check from somebody else, and you have to buy from someone that you trust. There is a lot of trust going on with kosher. Is also trust. You trust the MK, right? You trust the MK that the food's kosher. So if a person has ksav kabbalah, you've done your halachic due diligence, and you check it twice every 7 years. You're doing your halachic due diligence. You're fine. But going to a random vendor who you don't know and he's buying en masse from someone in Israel and he has no idea who the scribe is and he can't tell you if the scribe has a certificate, be careful with that kind of stuff. I'm not going to invalidate it, God forbid. I'm sure many of them are kosher. Probably most of them are kosher. I hope all of them are kosher. But certainly when you're buying for yourself or for anybody else, you should know this. Does the scribe have ksav kabbalah? Does he have a certificate of a scribe? Yeah.
Do they have leeway in their calls? I've been exposed to some things, and that's why I'm troubled.
Do they have leeways in calls?
Is there some things where you'd say, well, you can let it go?
There is lechatchila and there is b'diavad. There are laws, as we'll learn, where in the first case scenario it shouldn't be done that way, but if it's done that way, we say it's kosher. The general rule is, at least from my point of view, is that when you're buying something, you don't want to buy something that's second-rate kosher. You want to buy something that's lechatchila kosher. When you're checking something, you'd rather the guy invalidate your mezuzah and say that the last 10 years you had a mezuzah that's not kosher in your house? No. So let him say that it was b'diavad, that it was at least in the second rate, it's kosher. But we'll fix it now to make it better, or buy a new one. So you have to have a little bit of, you have to use some of your sechel, when you come with these things. But yeah, so let's continue with the Gemara. I just want to finish this. Section, please. All right. As we learn more of this, a lot of these questions will become answered because we're just beginning the laws. All we've learned is the law of letters touching and the laws of the hay. We still have 21 more letters to learn about, and we have lots of more laws to learn about. So let's move forward. All right. Okay. Igra, a sage named Igra. Chamua, last 3 words on the page. Chavtes Amud Aleph. Chamua de Rab Abba, the father-in-law of Rabbi Abba. Ifsikele karadehe, the leg of the letter hey of his tefillin, in the word deha'am, in your tefillin there's a word ha'am, the nation. So the letter hey in the word ha'am was broken. Benikiva with some perforation in the ink. So Asla Kameda Rab Abba, his son-in-law is a sage, so he went to his son-in-law and showed him a tefillin. Amar Lei, and Abba told him, his son-in-law told him, in Mishtayr by Kashir Tana, he used the law we just learned, that if the hay still has a little bit left on the right side, the leg's left a little bit left, to make it a minor letter, thus connecting the bar on the top with the leg, suspended leg on the bottom left, as we described earlier, kosher, it's kosher. If lav, and if not, pasul, it's pasul. The Gemara brings it to tell us that the law cited earlier is not just a law that someone argued, but a law that was brought into practice. This is what's called ma'aser rav, and a law that's brought into practice by our sages, especially as it's recorded in the Gemara, has more weight. You know, if someone came along to disagree with it, we would say, well, we've already implemented this law, so we're going to go with this law. So the Gemara is kind of saying the story to put an anchor on this law, to say that the law remains, that if the right leg of the hay is broken, so long as there's still enough leg to make it look like a hay, pun intended there.
Yeah, left.
Yeah?
Yeah.
There's enough leg on the right side of the hay.
Like a stand on.
That's right.
When they show.
Enough leg on the hay to make it identifiable and connect it with the bottom left suspended leg, then it remains kosher.
It has to be connected to the top bar, though, right?
Yes, that's correct. So
Not the bottom.
that's a good point. So over here, the illustration they give you is where the whole thing is missing. But the same thing is true if it's cut. So if it's cut, let's say right there, so there's a little ink space, right? So you'd have to measure from on top of the space to up there. Is there enough to make it into a hay? So we view the left part as if it's not there, right? And we say, would it still look like a hay? Even though there's some ink there. In other words, there's a little bit of extra ink sitting on your tefillin, almost, which we either get rid of or we connect it to the rest of your hay, depending on the circumstances. But they make this illustration to make it easier, as if the whole bottom half is missing. But the same thing applies if it's cut, right? That's actually the terminology the Gemara uses, is nikev, that it's perforated as opposed to chaser, something like that.
So it's much better to buy a large one than a small one.
The larger tefillin mezuzahs are definitely better.
Measure the small one.
It's very, very, very difficult. That's which is why the small ones are more expensive. If a good kosher small ones, the small sefer Torahs are also more expensive. If you ever get an aliyah from the Torah made for my grandfathers, or a small Torah, if you look close, that Torah is a highly skilled writer because it's quite small, but the letters are clean, neat, and that takes a lot of time to be able to make such small letters in such a neat and kosher fashion. But when it comes to the small mezuzahs that are cheap, God forbid I don't want to say it's not kosher, but I wouldn't recommend buying the cheap small mezuzahs.
No.
In other words, if you're getting a small mezuzah, it's got to be very expensive because it means it's someone who's really skilled wrote them. Because it's very difficult to do all these laws when it's so close. All right, God willing, tomorrow some more letters will be introduced to you and some more laws, and we'll learn as the days and weeks go on. We're going to see how much goes into making tefillin mezuzahs and how careful we need to be with checking them and buying things that are top-notch kosher. Especially since all mitzvahs, but especially tefillin mezuzahs, are channels for Hashem's blessings for us and our home. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Yeah.